On an afternoon bathed in the soft, golden light of the sunset, which caressed the small village with a tone of almost mystical solemnity, a young woman was about to face one of the most devastating moments of her life. The wedding ceremony unfolded under the indifferent gaze of nature, the tribal altar adorned with flickering torches casting shadows that seemed to dance on the forest walls. The setting was almost ritualistic, but nothing about the event suggested joy or celebration. Instead, there was a palpable tension in the air, an omen that the young woman's future would be sealed at that moment, irrevocably. At 18, Mary found herself with tears in her eyes, her throat tight, and an unbearable pain in her chest. She trembled, not only from the cold of the evening but also from the profound fear that overwhelmed her. How could she be there, about to marry a man older than her own grandfather, an 83-year-old man to whom her parents had promised her hand? She didn't know. She couldn't imagine what her first night as a wife would be like, next to a man twice her age, a man who could barely move without the aid of a cane. Shame and despair consumed her being. "Mother, please, don't make me marry him," Mary pleaded, her words choked by the tears streaming down her face. Her voice faltered, and the pain of being condemned to a future without choices was too much to bear. Her mother, watching the scene with an impassive expression, showed no reaction. She merely stood there, arms crossed, like a sentinel of her own pain. She knew there was nothing more to be done. "You will marry him, Mary," her mother replied with a chilling coldness, as if she were talking about the simple exchange of an object, not her own daughter's fate. Mary's father, with a stern and unyielding face, merely nodded, confirming the sentence in an even colder voice. "Now you are his," he said, as if it were an absolute truth, a truth from which there was no escape. There was no room for discussion, for questioning. Mary's fate was already set, and no one, not even she herself, had the right to change it. Mary's heart sank, crushed by the pain of rejection. Her tears were the reflection of deep suffering, a wound that bled without ceasing. The young woman, still in shock, heard her father continue, "You're not even our daughter anymore. Have you forgotten where you came from? You'll be fine. After all, you always loved living in the forest and working with these people, didn't you?" He was referring to the fact that Mary had started studying nursing and had volunteered on missions in remote villages and tribes. A job she did with love, but that, at that moment, didn't seem enough to save her future. Her mother, impatient, took a step forward and ordered, "Now go, quickly. The altar awaits you." And so, without more words, the young woman was pushed toward what remained of her freedom, the makeshift altar surrounded by curious eyes and low chants, as if the whole world were watching, but no one really cared about what she was about to face. With each step, the weight of her destiny became more unbearable. Her heart sank with the thought that, soon, she would be beside that man, the man her parents had chosen for her, an 83-year-old man whose presence felt oppressive and strange. She didn't know if it was the cold of the night that made her hands tremble or the fear, an immense fear that paralyzed her with each movement. The moment arrived. The tribe's elder, respected by all, spoke the sacred words, sealing the marriage with the authority of his grave and resonant voice. There was no romance. There was no consent. Only a cold formality, an agreement that seemed to have been set long before that day. The look of the man, growing more distant and impenetrable, was the last thing Mary saw before being led to her new home. "Your things are already in the cabin," her father said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Now you live here." Her mother, with a sigh of relief, bade farewell to her daughter with words that sounded more like a sentence than a goodbye. "You will never set foot in this house again. It's your problem now." And with that, the young woman watched her parents' cars leave, leaving her behind, alone, in the grip of a fate she hadn't chosen, and from which she could no longer escape. With a shattered heart and tear-filled eyes, Mary walked toward the house of the man who was now her husband. Each step felt like an unbearable burden, and the silence surrounding her only made the situation seem more surreal. She felt as if the world were spinning around her, and she, a powerless spectator, watched her future being consumed by a cruel reality. As she entered the cabin, something unexpected awaited her. Her eyes, still blurred by tears, widened at the sight before her. The house was simple, but there was something there, something that made her feel even more alone and out of place than ever. She didn't know what it was, but she felt that this place had been prepared for someone completely different from herself. Everything felt strange and hostile, as if she were being swallowed by a world that wasn't hers. And then, with a final sigh, Mary realized the true extent of what had just happened. Her life, her freedom, her identity, all of it had been stripped from her, and she stood before a man she could barely understand. The pain of disappointment, the weight of the imposed sacrifice, all of this mixed in her chest. How had this happened? How had she ended up here? And what was really happening at that moment? She didn't know. But she knew that something much greater than herself was at stake. The question hanging in the air, unanswered, was simple: how and why did a young woman full of dreams and hopes, who was starting her nursing career at a renowned university, end up being forced to marry an 83-year-old man from a remote tribe? She, who was about to embark on a charity mission, traveling to isolated villages to help those in need, now found herself imprisoned in a fate she had never chosen. And the truth was that, as her story began to unfold, the future seemed like a blank page, still without direction and without answers. The only certainty was the pain consuming her now, as she tried to understand what it meant to be forced to live under the shadow of a promise made long before she was born. The expedition seemed like the perfect opportunity for Mary to put all her newly acquired knowledge into practice. She knew that, finally, she would have the chance to work in a real setting, far from classrooms, in an environment that required skills, courage, and, above all, a generous heart. It was the kind of experience that would transform her career, but more than that, it would change her life forever. "I can't believe we're finally here, seeing all of this up close," exclaimed Mary excitedly as she arranged the last items in a large donation box. Inside were clothes, medications, and toys for the children. She was nervous, but an overwhelming sense of excitement filled her. "I hope this really makes a difference for them," she said, her voice full of hope. Beside her, her friend Sarah smiled, sharing the same excitement. "I hope so too. And who knows, maybe we'll meet some attractive locals," Sarah joked, with a mischievous look. Mary couldn't help but smile, but quickly corrected her friend. "Oh, Sarah, that's all you think about. They're just normal people who happen to live in a more isolated place." The friendship between the two was a mix of joy and compassion, and they both knew they were about to experience something that would change the way they viewed the world. The journey to the village was undoubtedly a whirlwind of emotions. Mary was completely breathless at the sight of the pristine beauty of the surrounding nature. The dense forests, imposing mountains, and the cloudless blue sky formed a breathtaking landscape. But what touched her most was the warm welcome from the locals. When she and Sarah arrived at the village, the residents greeted them with genuine smiles and curious glances, making Mary feel instantly at home. It was as if she had found a home, even though she was thousands of miles away. "I'm really appreciating what I'm doing here," Mary told her friend, referring to her new role as a nurse in the village. She knew that the help she could offer was valuable, but she also felt she was receiving something in return, a new understanding of life, of people, and of herself. The feeling of making a difference was becoming more and more real. It was in this setting that Mary met Hallian. He was a young warrior of 21, an impressive man whose strong physique was adorned with tribal markings that told stories of courage, struggle, and honor. His body seemed sculpted for the role he held within the village, a natural leader, always ready to teach the younger ones to care for their community, while his charismatic presence captivated everyone around him. When Mary met him, he had a cut on his arm, the result of an accident while helping to restore one of the village huts. His calm and serious demeanor contrasted with the injury, and his expression conveyed an almost supernatural calm, as if he were accustomed to facing pain with the same serenity he faced life. "I got hurt while working." "Don't worry," he said, but there was something in his gaze that made Mary feel he wasn't just talking about the injury. He looked at her in a way that seemed to go beyond what words could express. Those intense, sincere eyes created an instant connection between them. There was no rush in the moment, no need to say more than necessary, but the silence said everything. Mary focused on treating Hallian's arm, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was happening between them. Their hearts beat faster with each passing second, and the warmth growing between them felt inexplicable yet immensely real. He wasn't the kind of man she expected to meet on a mission like this. He wasn't the type of man she imagined as a partner, but at the same time, something inside her felt he was beginning to hold a special place in her life. As days turned into weeks, the bond between Mary and Hallian grew in ways no one could have predicted. Although their cultural differences were clear, with their stories, beliefs, and ways of life being completely distinct, there was something stronger, something that defied the barriers of time and culture. They continued to meet, always sharing a smile and exchanging words more often. The warrior, so respected by his tribe, showed a vulnerability Mary never imagined she'd see in him. He was more than a leader, he was a man with a huge heart, who deeply cared about others, especially her. In moments when Hallian visited the village, they explored hidden corners together, the most secluded parts of the region. At night, under the starlit sky, they sat around the campfire, talking about their dreams for the future. Hallian's words were filled with a sincere desire for change and improvement, not only for his village but for the world around them. And, as time passed, Mary began to see herself more and more within these dreams, as part of a story she could no longer imagine without him. "I've never felt so alive, so loved," Mary confessed to Sarah in one of the rare conversations where she managed to open up about what was happening between her and Hallian. "He's shown me a world of care and understanding that I never imagined was possible. I feel like I've finally found my place here, with him." But not everyone shared the same vision. Some people in the village, and even beyond, began to question the bond between Mary and Hallian. In a conversation that seemed less about concern and more about criticism, someone remarked, "You spend so much time with that boy. Do you really think you'll end up with some foolish native?" The words cut Mary in an unexpected way. They were not only a critique of her relationship with Hallian but a reflection of a deep-seated prejudice that still existed in the world around her. She felt the weight of judgment, the pressure of being a woman challenging norms and expectations. Yet, when she looked at Hallian, she saw nothing but someone who understood her in a way no one else ever had. The bond between Mary and Hallian became a love story that couldn't be easily explained. It was a story of resilience, transformation, and, above all, courage. They were breaking barriers, facing prejudice, and at the same time creating something that defied the expectations of the world around them. But what did the future hold for them? Mary didn't know. She only knew that, at that moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be, by Hallian's side, living a love she could never have imagined. The words coming from her father's mouth hit Mary like a direct blow to her chest. "This is already an embarrassment for us. And on top of that, we have to keep paying for your university, which is nothing but a waste of our money," he said with disdain, his voice sharp as a blade. Her mother, equally severe, didn't hesitate to join the attack. "You've always been a burden. My foolish sister just had to die during childbirth, and now here we are, stuck in this situation. Even after all this, I still feel dead inside," she added, her tone filled with bitter resentment. The words of that night pierced Mary like a sharp knife. They didn't just hurt her, they revealed a sad truth she had always known but never wanted to accept. She wasn't her parents' biological daughter. She was the niece of a sister who had died in childbirth, a sister who, in some way, had given birth not only to a daughter but to a condemnation for Mary. She was nothing more than a burden, a responsibility that no one seemed to want to bear with affection or love. Her entire life had been a constant search for acceptance, for a love she knew she would never receive. Her parents saw her only as an obligation, something they had inherited with the grief of a sister gone too soon. They raised her not out of love but because there was no other choice. And over the years, Mary had absorbed the weight of this reality. With each cold look, each bitter word, she internalized more and more the idea that she would never be loved in the way she dreamed of, that she would never have the unconditional love that everyone deserves. Her mother's words cut through the silence of the night, digging deeper into Mary's soul. They didn't just expose her parents' disdain, they also revealed a truth that, until that moment, she had refused to clearly see. She would never be more than a burden to those who should have been her safe haven, her refuge. The reality of that night not only reopened old wounds but also sealed the young woman's fate in an irreversible way. As tears silently streamed down Mary's face, she felt a bittersweet sense of relief. She had tried for years to earn the love and approval she had always lacked, but now she knew that, perhaps, she would need to search for that love elsewhere. A light flickered for an instant in her heart, a flame of hope she had never imagined finding. Hallian. The love he had offered her seemed to be the only pure and unconditional thing in her life, the only bond not marked by the weight of rejection and bitterness. But her mother's words pulled her momentarily away from the memory of Hallian's affection. "She already likes being with those natives, so let her go live there and get out of our house," her parents said, as if Mary's very life was disposable, something that no longer fit. Mary felt a deep chill hearing those words. Her entire body trembled, not only with fear but with the pain of realizing that her own home had never truly been a home. Her parents were discarding her as if she were nothing more than a nuisance, a presence they simply needed to eliminate from their lives. She begged, her heart breaking, asking for mercy and compassion, but her words disappeared into the air, meeting only her parents' indifference. It was clear that there was no place for her in that house, not now, not ever. Despair took hold of Mary, but there was no way to fight what was being decided by those who were supposed to protect her. She wouldn't even have time to seek out Hallian, ask for his help, or try to change the course of her fate. The wedding was set for the next day. Mary felt as if the world had collapsed around her. Not only the betrayal of her parents, but the weight of the imminent future was suffocating her. The marriage that awaited her was a relentless destiny, a sentence that would be imposed on her without even giving her the chance to protest. The man she was to be forced to marry was an 80-year-old man, someone she barely knew, someone who represented everything she feared and hated. He was not a man to whom she could offer the love she so desired. He was the embodiment of a life without choices, a life that had been imposed on her from the moment of her birth. On the morning of the next day, all that remained for Mary was to walk aimlessly, her steps heavy as she made her way to the makeshift altar. There was no happiness in that place, only a painful emptiness that grew with each step she took. The altar was surrounded by an aura of coldness, of resignation, as if the very air was permeated with an inevitable fate. Beside her, the 80-year-old man walked in silence, a shadow of someone who didn't understand the weight of what was about to happen. To him, this marriage was just a formality, a tribal convention. For Mary, it was the end of all her dreams, the burial of everything she had once imagined for herself. As a young woman full of life, filled with hopes and dreams, Mary could never have imagined her destiny would bring her to this point. How could she accept, with a broken heart, a future so cruel and senseless? How could she surrender to those who had never loved her, to that man who represented the death of her youth and her hopes? With each step she took, the weight of reality became more unbearable. But there was no escape. Fate had caught up with her, and the young woman felt as if she were being dragged into an abyss from which she could no longer escape. Mary could never have imagined that such a devastating choice would turn into an opportunity for rebirth. Her path to the university for nursing, her passion for helping people, and her love for Hallian, all of it seemed to have been brutally taken from her. The tears that flowed freely down her face bore silent witness to the pain consuming her. Each step to the makeshift altar, each word spoken in the ceremony, seemed to seal her fate, erasing the dreams of a life with the man she loved and a career she had built with so much effort. When she was finally led into the cabin, with a heavy heart and an exhausted spirit, Mary could hardly imagine that there, in that place of shadows and uncertainty, something entirely unexpected awaited her. With eyes still blurred by tears, it took her a few moments to adjust to the gentle dimness illuminating the interior. Upon realizing what was before her, a mix of surprise and disbelief overtook her expression. Standing before her, with a smile filled with love and tenderness, was Hallian. Shock and hope fought in her chest, and her voice came out trembling, almost a whisper, "Hallian? How are you here?" He approached her gently, taking her hands in his, and with a gaze that conveyed more than words could express, he said, "This man, Mary, is my father, the leader of our village. And I am the true groom he has brought to you." Hallian then explained the carefully devised plan. The elder who had bought her from her parents was actually Hallian's father, the village chief. He knew of the hardships Mary faced with her adoptive parents, the constant rejection, and the contempt she endured. Aware that her parents would never allow her to unite with a native, the chief decided to act. He offered a payment to take her to the village, knowing her family would readily accept, sealing their daughter's fate without remorse. The wedding ceremony was merely a symbolic ritual, an ancient tradition in which the tribe's leader officiated the union on behalf of his son, blessing the young woman and reinforcing the commitment to welcome her as part of the tribe. Between tears of relief and joy, Mary understood that she was, finally, with the man she loved, and more than that, she had found a new family. The tribe, aware of the true meaning of the ceremony, celebrated their love with joy. The villagers gathered around Mary and Hallian, greeting them as a blessed couple and welcoming her with smiles and songs of happiness. That night, the cabin witnessed not only the union of two loving souls but also Mary's acceptance into the community. At last, she felt she belonged, surrounded by people who truly cared for her. In the days and months that followed, Mary found new meaning in her life. With the unconditional support of Hallian and the village, she resumed her nursing studies, dedicating herself even more to her calling to care for others. The community not only supported her growth but celebrated each of her achievements as a collective triumph. By the end of her studies, Mary became the village nurse, using her skills to serve those who had welcomed her with open arms. Over time, Mary also transformed the daily life of the village. She introduced modern hygiene practices and medical treatments she had learned at the university, blending them with the tribe's traditional knowledge to achieve results that astonished everyone. Alongside Hallian, who had become her devoted companion, Mary traveled to distant tribes, bringing her passion and abilities to those who needed it most. Her former classmates, inspired by Mary's courage and determination, began to visit the village regularly, bringing new materials and medical knowledge with them. These visits became a bridge between two worlds, fostering an exchange of knowledge and strengthening bonds of friendship and mutual respect. Mary realized she didn't have to choose between her origins and her new life. Both worlds were now a part of who she was. As the years passed, Mary finally found the peace she had sought. The pain of rejection and betrayal was replaced by a deep sense of acceptance and belonging. She became the adoptive daughter of Chief Tupa and his wife, a sister to the tribe members, and a respected healer among all. In her new family, she found the love and understanding that had always been missing. More than simply being loved and respected, Mary discovered the strength of a community that embraced her for who she truly was. She became a resilient woman, able to make a difference in the world around her. The village was not only a new home but the place where she blossomed, found purpose, and made her mark as someone who, through love and dedication, transformed and was transformed. If you liked the story, I'm sure that one of the videos that is here on the screen will move you too. But before you click, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our next videos. A big hug and see you in the next story.